the silence of the early morning is broken not by noise, but by the awakening of truth, something shifts, not outside, but within. On July 7, 2025, that shift occurred. Not with fanfare, not with the shouting of men or the clashing of weapons, but in a whisper. A whisper so loud that it shattered the illusions built by nations and the pride held in the human heart. For centuries, mankind has run from silence and the pride held in the human heart. For centuries, mankind has run from silence. It has built empires to escape emptiness, created distraction to flee from truth. But what was revealed on that day was not a prophecy to entertain the curious. It was a mirror to confront the soul. The mirror did not lie. It reflected the disease of arrogance, the decay of spirit, and the rebellion against the natural laws. And so the knees that once stood tall in defiance began to bend, not because of an enemy, not from defeat, but because the weight of truth was heavier than the strongest crown. The way of revelation is never loud. It comes like the rising sun, gradually illuminating all that has been hidden in shadow. The events of July 7 did not begin in a single moment. They had been building silently, like pressure beneath the surface. Human beings ignored the signs. The sky had changed, the animals had stirred unnaturally, the soil had dried in places that once flourished. Yet the heart of man was fixed on gain, on competition, on ruling others rather than ruling himself. And so, the whisper had to come. The whisper that was not a sound, but a truth. That the world does not belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who live in harmony with its law. The revelation of that day was not made with smoke and thunder, was made with clarity. Like a sword slicing through fog, it exposed the roots of every lie, every manipulation, every false teaching. People had built their lives on systems that were rotten at the core. They chased success with broken compasses and built towers on sinking ground. And when the truth came, it didn't just crack the surface. It reached into every hidden place, into every transaction where justice was traded for profit, into every relationship built on control, into every prayer offered without sincerity. And in that moment, the eyes of many were opened. Some turned away, some wept, but all understood. This was no ordinary day. It was not marked by calendar, but by consequence. The consequence of forgetting. The consequence of choosing power over purity. And in that understanding, the strong became soft, the defiant fell silent, and the proud bowed. Not before any man, but before the invisible law that governs all. To be brought to your knees by truth is not humiliation. It is healing. It is the beginning of remembering. The body knows how to stand, but the spirit must learn how to kneel. And when the spirit kneels, it is not crushed. It is lifted. And when the spirit kneels, it is not crushed. It is lifted. Because in kneeling, the soul aligns with something greater. The revelation was not to destroy the human being, but to restore him. Not to condemn, but to invite. Invite him back into rhythm, back into alignment, back into purpose. But invitation requires choice. And choice requires awareness. That is why the truth did not scream. It whispered, it waited, it watched. And those who heard it, those who felt it, could no longer live the same. They could not speak empty words anymore, could not chase empty goals, could not hate without hurting themselves, because the veil had been lifted. And what they saw was not a threat from outside, it was a correction from within. Everything that matters is invisible. Discipline, integrity, patience, gratitude, love. These are not things you can purchase or measure, but they are the very foundation of a meaningful life. July 7 was a reminder of that. It reminded us that the visible world is temporary, but the invisible world is eternal. That no matter how much gold one gathers, it cannot buy peace. That no matter how many battles one wins, it cannot silence guilt. That no matter how many nations bow to you, your own conscience must also kneel. And on that day, many were forced to face this. The illusion that they were in control evaporated. The illusion that time would wait vanished. The illusion that success would fill the emptiness crumbled. And in that crumbling, truth began to rise. Some experienced it in visions, some through dreams, some through sudden loss, others through quiet awe. But the message was the same. Return. Let go. Humble yourself. The old ways have ended. The age of exploitation, manipulation, and domination, its time is over. Now begins the age of awakening. Not the awakening of the mind, but of the soul. A reconnection not to data, but to destiny. A surrender not to systems, but to source. And the way is through the knees, through bowing, through silence, through becoming nothing in order to become whole. There is no other path, for the proud cannot carry the weight of truth. Only the humble can hold it. Only the empty can be filled. Only those who have fallen can be truly raised. Those who stood on July 6 in defiance, by July 7 had knelt. And those who had already lived in alignment, they felt peace, not panic, because the revelation did not bring fear to the faithful, it brought clarity. It brought confirmation that the quiet path, though mocked, was the true path, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the inner cultivation was not in vain, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared them, that the discipline of the unseen had prepared. And so, while the world trembled, they stood firm, not with arrogance, but with rootedness, rooted not in ideology, but in essence, the essence of being in harmony with truth. These are the ones who will carry the next age, not because they are special, but because they are willing to listen, willing to change, willing to bend when the winds of correction blow. To those who ignore the signs, July 7 was just another day, but to those who listened, it was everything. It was the closing of a chapter. It was the beginning of accountability. The earth no longer tolerates the exploitation of her resources. The soul no longer tolerates the starvation of its purpose. The spirit no longer tolerates the pollution of its peace. The correction is not coming, it has begun. And it begins not outside but within. In the bending of knees, in the lowering of pride, in the surrender of control. Those who do not kneel voluntarily will be brought low by consequence, not as punishment but as mercy. Because when truth comes, it either lifts or it crushes. There is no middle ground. And on that day, truth did not come as theory, it came as reality. Reality that pierced the heart, shook the spirit, and awakened the sleeping soul. To be brought to your knees by truth is to find the ground again, to feel the earth, to remember who you are, without titles, without labels, without noise. It is there in the stillness that life begins again. This was the gift of July 7. Not chaos, but clarity. Not wrath, but reckoning. Not despair, but direction. A direction that calls all who are willing to return to the center, to bow not in weakness, but in wisdom. And in that bowing, to rise, not with pride, but with peace. What was revealed on July 7th, 2025 was not a new warning, it was the final one. The message was not encrypted in the language of scholars, nor veiled behind rituals understood by the few. It was clear, simple, and unbearable to the proud. The day did not arrive with terror, but it ended with trembling. For what came into the world was a light that could not be dimmed, and when it shone, it revealed not only the wounds of the world, but also the rebellion that caused them. The world should be full of men. The time did not arrive with terror, but it ended with trembling. For what came into the world was a light that could not be dimmed, and when it shone, it revealed not only the wounds of the world, but also the rebellion that caused them. That light did not ask for permission. It entered the soul like a mirror and demanded that man see himself, not his reflection in the eyes of others, not the image he presents to society, but the raw, stripped-down truth of his being. And what was seen by many could not be unseen. The emptiness of false ambition, the hollowness of pleasures chased without meaning, the sorrow of living disconnected from purpose, these were exposed like bones beneath flesh. And when the soul is confronted with such honesty, it has only two choices: deny or kneel. And many could not deny anymore. What brought them to their knees was not the fear of external punishment. It was the unbearable realization that they had walked for years in the wrong direction, that they had praised what was hollow and mocked what was sacred, that they had sacrificed their integrity on the altar of applause, that they had founded their lives on the altar of applause. The events of July 7 were not global in the way news channels report, but they were universal in the way truth operates. From the silence of mountain monasteries to the noise of cities, from the lips of children to the cries of the elderly, something vibrated in the spirit of humanity that day. It was the vibration of alignment returning, and with it came disruption. Not because truth seeks chaos, but because anything built on lies cannot remain when truth arrives. So, when a light shows up, when can we not see this arrive? That day was not a divine punishment, but a divine unveiling. What was hidden beneath surface, smiles, and religious routines came up for judgment. Not from others, but from within. Each soul became its own courtroom, and the evidence was undeniable. Not in words, but in the unease that could no longer be suppressed. Many tried to continue as if nothing had happened. They went back to work. They scrolled their devices. They engaged in the same distractions. But something inside had changed. A seed had been planted, and seeds do not argue, they grow. That seed was awareness, and awareness, once born, cannot return to sleep. It disturbs, it haunts, it challenges. It whispers in moments of silence, in the gap between thoughts, reminding the heart that something was shown and something must change. And that inner pressure, that inner confrontation, that inner stirring, this is what brought people to their knees, not a prophet's voice, not a fire from the sky, but the realization that time is sacred and they had wasted it. That life is a gift and they had traded it for artificial pleasures. That breath is holy and they had used it to curse, to lie, to manipulate. When the mirror is placed before the soul, it cannot pretend any longer. And so the soul bent not out of fear of punishment, but out of reverence for what had been revealed. The power of July 7 was not in a single event, but in the unseen current it carried. A current that continues to flow now. A current that is invisible to the eyes, but undeniable to the heart. Those who are sensitive to the movement of energy, who listen beyond words, who feel beyond logic, they know the day did not end. It began. It began the unraveling of falsehoods long protected. It began the elevation of voices long ignored. It began the burning away of ideologies that had enslaved rather than freed. The revelation was not just about global politics or environmental shifts or religious science. It was about alignment with the eternal. And anything out of alignment was exposed. And everything exposed was given a choice. Transform or perish. Not in physical death, but in the loss of meaning. The death of the soul. What shook the world on that day was not a catastrophe. It was clarity. And clarity, when piercing the fog of illusion, is more terrifying than any natural disaster. Because it leaves no place to hide. You cannot blame others for what you now see. You cannot run to distraction when your own soul convicts you. You cannot pretend to be asleep when you've already been awakened. You cannot pretend to be asleep when you've already been. And that is the pain of awakening. It forces the death of the false self, the self built on ego, on performance, on deception. And that death feels like loss, but in truth it is liberation. To lose what is false is to gain what is real. But the transition is not comfortable. It strips, it burns, it demands. And so many wept, not out of despair, but out of the pain of shedding what they thought was essential, but was only excess. The death is not uncomfortable. It strips, it burns, it demands, and so many wept, not out of despair, but out of the pain of only being. And so many wept, not out of despair, but out of pain. And so many wept, not out of despair, but out of pain. And what was revealed on that day was the consequence of forgetting. Forgetting the sacredness of life. Forgetting the interconnection between all beings. Forgetting that every thought plants a seed and every word builds or destroys. And the consequence was not thunder, but sorrow. A sorrow so deep that it became sacred. A sorrow that cleanses the soul like fire purifies gold. And those who allowed that sorrow to wash over them, to teach them, to humble them, those became the carriers of the new way. Not with pride, but with brokenness. Not with speeches, but with presence. Not with ambition, but with quiet strength. They began to walk differently, speak differently, choose differently, because they had seen, and seeing changes everything. This is why the revelation brought many to their knees. Not because they were attacked, but because they were invited. Invited to return, invited to remember, invited to rise again, not with fists clenched, but with hands open. The revelation called the soul back to its original posture, not of dominance, but of devotion. Not of control, but of connection. And that calling is still echoing in the wind, in the trembling of the earth, in the unrest of nations, in the cries of the innocent, in the yearning of the seekers. And it will not stop until all that is false is burned away and only truth remains. This is not a prophecy of doom, it is a blueprint for rebirth. But birth begins in labor. And labor begins with surrender. And surrender begins when the knees finally touch the ground and the heart no longer resists the truth. On July 7, many were brought low, not to be buried, but to be planted. You remember. You share life. You let go. You ask. You deal. You learn. No more denial. No more babble. No more planting, for the earth does not bury seeds, it births them. And the soul, when it kneels, is not ending, it is beginning. And from that place of surrender, something holy rises, something eternal, something that cannot be shaken